Welcome to the Spore Heap. This is the chance where we get to come together with our experts and ask them some of the fantastic questions that you sent in to us on Patreon. And we had a really nice note from Patricia Amero, who says she's really looking forward to the Q&A sessions, and it always makes her think, why didn't I think of asking those questions? So hopefully we've picked out some belters and we've done you proud. And yeah, Richard, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Yes, I'm tired and a bit frayed, but it's extraordinary.
We'll take it easy on you with these questions. But Derek, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'll kick us off with a nice soft opener, I think, this one. Dr. Parker from Lecce. What do you look for to distinguish between buildings of different eras?
Well, before I started working in archaeology, I was an art historian, and to be honest, that's the approach I take. You look at the mouldings, you look at the styles of things, styles of window, and you can identify a lot about a building by that, by an art historical process. But of course, there it gets more complicated, because you can have a 18th century window stuck in a medieval wall. So you have to look at the whole structure, and you have to look at its plan, and because the plan forms of buildings changed dramatically at the end of the 17th century. They sort of suddenly. They stopped using the medieval system and went for another one. So you can, you have to look at the whole building really, and you have to look with an intense, inquisitive gaze at its fabric. So materials, the style of things, mouldings, and the relationships between sections of the building is the key really.
You make it sound pretty straightforward, but Michael Sperry asks a slightly probing follow-up question. Is there an example you can give of a building, or at least part of one, that fooled you into thinking it was from a different era?
Very probably all the time. I expect I've got nearly everything wrong in my entire career, but one hopes that sometimes I was right.
Nothing that stands out as a sort of palm to face moment.
Well, I mean, there are those. I mean, when you're looking at a building, you think, I have no idea whether this is modern or ancient. It's not got a single architectural feature. It's built in some timeless way, and you think, am I looking at a medieval structure or somebody's garden ornament? And actually, there was one on this dig just up in the. It looked like a sort of a plastered embrasure in a garden. And you think, what is that doing here? Is it a remnant of the elusive Champagnat house? So I spent hours troweling my way around it, only just to discover that it was a water feature. And so, yes, there we are.
That's good.
You've got to be, pride cometh before a fall in archaeology.
That's quite an interesting point you make about moving of material into people's gardens and potentially from previous manners, and that leads in nicely to Paul Faulkner's question. And he talks about ruined buildings and derelict buildings and the repurposing of the materials that once built that structure, and the process of repurposing that. So would whole communities come together and remove it? Would people pinch and steal little bits of the structure and repurpose it, or would there be a sell-off of that material? How does that work?
Well, generally when a building comes to the end of its useful life, it does fall into ruin, and so sometimes we might get a mixture of all those, but with something like Modbury Priory at the Reformation, that property was given by the king. He stole it from its legitimate owners and gave it to his friends, and they basically exploited that to enrich themselves. So they controlled the demolition and the sale of the materials. So it wouldn't have been, the whole community wouldn't have come in and torn it down. They'd have had to buy the materials off the new owner of the priory, and they'd have done so because it cost a fortune to move materials around. So generally what you do is anything useful you reclaim up until the modern era, up to the railways basically. And so they'd have taken all the usable stone out of it, and often that meant that the only bits left behind are the bits that you don't want to use, which are the unfashionable elements, like the remains of gigantic fireplaces or unfashionable style doorways. So you sometimes find monastic sites where only the sort of worked stone survives. Everything else, all the bits that could be repurposed as walls, are gone, and you've just got these carved features standing around in a field. It's really odd.
And are you finding evidence of that over the last
Well,
week?
there is no question that Modbury is absolutely stuffed with the remains of really high status medieval and Elizabethan houses. They're everywhere. You walk across a pavement and there's a fireplace in the pavement. You go into a garden and everywhere you look there are reused bits of window tracery and yes, Modbury is sitting on a pile of reused architecture.
They're a bunch of recyclers. This is great.
Yes,
Pioneers.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that's good.
And one of the problems, we've been doing a lot of dendrochronology on this this particular project, and one of the problems is people reused timbers. So if you're looking at the filling date of a tree, to a date you're building, you have to be careful that it's not being used from somewhere else.
So it's going to give you an older date for
Yes,
a new. That's very interesting.
So that's another pitfall.
Sneaky.
Very sneaky.
So we've got another good question from Justin Freeman. Comparing commercial research and community archaeology, what do the team think makes public engagement and involvement so important?
I have worked as a commercial archaeologist as well as for a time team, and the difference between the way we were perceived previously and the present day is extraordinary. Going on site in the old days, people had no idea why you were there or what you did or what the purpose of your work was, and they were often rather hostile. Now, because people have become involved through Time Team and other, sort of other very, very public programmes about archaeology, they are much more sympathetic. They know what to expect. They actually like what you're doing. They want to know about their houses. They're curious about them, and they're interested in the history. And they welcome you, and it is absolutely essential to involve people, because if people are going to go raiding their local ruined manor house, ideally you want them to leave the good bits behind so that people can understand it and appreciate it, and only take the bits that are really useless. And you also want people to be aware that if they have a historic property, it deserves respect and it deserves to be treated with care and to be allowed to speak of its past instead of just painting the whole thing beige. So it's absolutely vital that the community are involved in archaeology.
I guess that leads in quite nicely. So rather than just looking at the community aspect, also the professional aspect as well. So we've had a message from Thomas Gren, who says that they're looking at starting a career in archaeology. They've got a degree in history from a Canadian university, but what would we recommend as the best educational path to look at to become an archaeologist? Are there any particular universities that we'd recommend, and also are there any general tips for someone trying to break into the industry? And I guess that doesn't have to be just archaeology. You could look at the historic environment as a whole, but what do you think, Richard?
It's a very difficult question to answer, and I certainly don't think I'm able to answer the question about recommending particular institutions.
I might.
But
You're biased.
Read as widely as you can. Read as widely as you can about everything. Try and understand that there is no difference between below ground archaeology and above ground archaeology. Except that above ground archaeology is better. Join a sort of your local archaeological or society and actually get some practical experience so you know what you're looking for. Read about things like stratigraphy and read about art history and about the different ways people built, the different materials they used and how they used them. And also try and take a relatively objective view. I'm bad at this because I hate the Georgians. But, so whenever people ask about architecture, I end up having to sort of like say, God, it's about 1760. Oh, no.
I wasn't expecting this.
But it's ideally you should try and have an even-handed view and should look at all periods with interest, whatever they are. Yeah.
Except for Georgians.
Everyone specialises, except for Georgians, yes.
Okay, that's a really good point. I think also that a lot of people will focus on digging and our subjects so much more. I mean, obviously digging's really fun, but hopefully Time Team captures this. You need a little bit of an expert in every area, so don't get too hung up on the digging. That will come, that'll be there. But
the
look at other
documentary
areas.
research, the topographical drawings, the maps. I mean, archaeology would be so dull if it was all just below ground. Or you need to learn about the context of things. So research is absolutely essential.
I would say there's a really good podcast called Career in Ruins that I'd recommend everyone listens to, and it's all about the variety of different careers in the historic environment. But I've only heard a few.
Shameless.
That was going to be the title of my autobiography. Was it? Unfortunately, somebody stole it.